Another question, Ben. Yes, the woman in green.
Thank you. I'd also like to congratulate LSE on organising what is a difficult and sensitive issue and having an open discussion. In a way, though, I was a little disappointed that straight away, having had a clarification that there is a distinction between responsibility and how that suddenly turns into being accused of blaming, that within about 5 minutes, somebody who'd said responsibility isn't blaming was then accused of blaming and victim blaming. So I was a bit disappointed, Jennifer, because the example you used of the McCanns, for example, and Kate McCann that you used, it is undoubtedly the case that the McCanns had some responsibility for the fact that they left their children on their own, and that does not mean that I think that they are to blame for the fact that their child was taken away. But if they had obviously not left their children on their own, a different set of circumstances would have occurred. We have to be able to say that without fear of people accusing you of somehow not caring about victims of rape, or that somehow... And that's what I find very difficult in this discussion. I think as well, Nazir, if I could ask you maybe to clarify something, because you actually said... you know, you said the law in the past dealt with victims very badly, and that it was time that we made amends for past faults, and that's the way we had to deal with things now. Well, that sounded more like a moral crusade than the law. And forgive me, but I do worry if you start to use the law to make amends for some past CPS guilt or some bad boys in the police. That is not a correct use of the law, and is a dangerous, in fact, use of the law, and can only lead to, in fact, an assault on justice. And you also mentioned that women, if they have to give, as you said, victims, and I think it's right that we say complainants, because we do have to remember that people are innocent until they're proven guilty. That is an important thing that I at least do not want to lose in all of this. But it does seem to me that if it's the case that for women to be cross-examined who have accused someone of rape, their intimate details are dragged before the courts, and you think this is inappropriate, it is also horrible and terrible. But you have to recognise, I would hope, that somebody who's accused of rape also has their intimate details dragged before the court and accused of the most heinous of crimes, and somehow that we are not allowed to mention that without somehow being, you know, or you didn't mention it. Let's put it this way. It's unpleasant to have your intimate details dragged before the court on either side of that. It's unpleasant, nasty, but in the cause of finding out whether somebody is guilty or innocent and whether you as a CPS have the right to take their liberty away, I think it's important those things are tested.
That's at least two questions.
Well, all right, my final point then is...
Can we have some responses from the panel,
fine.
Absolutely. I don't recall saying that because of past things we need to make amends. It's not about making amends. My point was that we've treated victims badly in the past. Historically we have, for all the reasons that Jennifer outlined in terms of previous, the ways we've dealt with cases in the past. We now have very good guidance. We now have good specialist prosecutors dealing with these cases, specialist police investigators. It's about getting it right. That's what we're trying to do now, and hopefully you'll see the benefits of that as we move forward. In relation to the other issue around the testimony that people have to give in court, absolutely agree with you. I mean, there has to be proper testing of the evidence. What we are concerned about, and what I think the government have been made reference to recently, is when you have multiple defendants in relation to one victim. When you have, in one case, 11 people cross-examining, 11 counsel cross-examining a 16-year-old girl over 6 days, asking the same question over and over and over again. You know, what service does that do to justice, and what role do the judge or judges have in that particular situation? So from my perspective, absolutely right that it should be properly tested and challenged, but it has to be fair to both sides.
Do you want to come back on the McCanns?
On the McCanns, I just don't understand the point you're making on the McCanns. I would have thought...
It's making a distinction between responsibility and blame.
Yeah, well, I don't see that the McCanns are responsible for what happened. I don't see that. I mean, they're responsible in the sense that they were... It really... We're now talking about... it's a semantic thing, isn't it?
No, so I think we're just arguing about how we use the word.
The word responsible, so. Yes, that's right.
Not at all, no.
Can I say something? I just want to say something about the way in which these cases are prosecuted. Now, there's a modern tendency, and it's not limited to criminal prosecutions, of prosecuting the kitchen sink. So you don't just have one charge, you have loads of charges. You don't just have one person accused, you have lots of accused. And you see it in the regulatory field as well. I once had to defend a midwife who was accused of 63 allegations of misconduct, and to try it would have taken probably about 6 weeks, and it would have been dreadful for her. Now, in the end, the regulator withdrew the case. But it seems to me the CPS, in a sense, is causing the very problem that it's now complaining about, because it insists on prosecuting these multi-handed cases with loads and loads of allegations against loads and loads of defendants. Now, if you've got a minor complainant, is that really necessary, I would ask? You don't need to prosecute all and sundry. You need to prosecute the primary person who is responsible. You don't need to have these very long trials where inevitably, if the defendants are all to be properly defended, and if there are 11 defendants, then they will all need to question the person who is making the complaint. And a way around that is simply not to have this sprawling indictment with everything but the kitchen sink thrown in the hope that the jury will think that because so many people are being accused, that in some sense there's no smoke without fire and therefore a conviction should follow. So that's my point.
Okay, another question. Is the gentleman near the front here?
For Barbara and Nazir, my question is to both of you, policy-wise moving forward, what do you see as your key suggestions? That's what I wanted, just a brief policy suggestions.
Broad question.
Well, I think we need to get away from the idea that sex crime needs to be treated differently, because I think that actually creates an expectation that it's also terrible and violating and awful, that therefore nobody wants to get involved unless you have all these special measures. And I think that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So I think we actually need to row back from that. And I think we need to say, particularly with adults, I can see you can make a difference in the respect of child defendants on the basis that they are less able, or sorry, not child defendants, but child complainants, just as with child defendants, that they're not able to face the rigours of the full adversarial process. But it seems to me if you're talking about an adult accusing another adult, they should be treated equally, and that involves a fundamental legal principle, which is equality before the law. And I think also the principle of legal certainty means that we shouldn't be carrying on this excavation into the past in relation to historic allegations, which we don't do for any other type of crime. So if you are a victim of burglary, insurance fraud, death by dangerous driving, you do not find the authorities running around looking to find out what went wrong all those years ago. No matter what's happened, it could be equally devastating. So there is a sense in which, at the moment, our current preoccupation with sex crime and the way it's prosecuted and the way it's treated is unbalancing the justice system, because it's creating a special category of complainant who is deemed to be, if you like, almost superior to other complainants. And I think that, whilst I can see the short-term measure of trying to redress the balance, I think in the long term that is damaging. So I would like to see these particular types of crimes treated in the same way as other crimes.